They were crowned with gold, wrapped in silk, and praised as the most fortunate women in all of Christendom. Yet on the night the world celebrated their rise to royalty, many medieval queens felt nothing but terror, for behind the closed doors of their wedding chambers, the crown offered no protection. The first night of marriage was not a private moment of tenderness. It was a test, a ritual, and sometimes a punishment. A queen's body became the battlefield on which alliances lived or died, and her fear was not only emotional but political, physical, and brutally real. History remembers their coronations, their portraits, their diplomacy. It rarely remembers the trembling hands, the silent prayers, the dread that sat like stone in their stomachs as the door shut behind them. Every queen knew what was expected. She had one chance to prove her purity, one chance to begin the race for an heir, and one chance to satisfy a husband she often barely knew. Failure was not merely embarrassing, it could destroy her kingdom, her marriage, even her life. Imagine being a young woman of 14 or 15, raised to obey, surrounded by strangers, married to a man decades older, and told that on this night, the future of nations rested on your body. Some queens tried to steel themselves, whispering reassurances learned from their ladies-in-waiting. Others cried behind veils heavy with jewels. Many had heard the whispered stories of kings who grew violent when frustrated, of consummations turned into spectacles, of brides forced to endure humiliation presented as duty. They knew that their word meant nothing. Only the sheets would speak for them by morning. Because the medieval world demanded proof. The consummation of a royal marriage was not a private mystery, it was political evidence. And while the actual act happened behind closed doors, everything around it was public. Courtiers escorted the couple to their chamber, clergy blessed the bed with solemn ritual, and nobles waited outside like witnesses at a trial. The queen understood that her wedding night was not hers. It belonged to the court, the kingdom, and the relentless machinery of dynastic power. This pressure was heavier for queens than anyone else. A king could survive scandal, a queen could not. If she hesitated, she could be labelled unfit. If she resisted, she could be accused of impurity. If she bled too little, or not at all, her lineage, her upbringing, and her honour could all be dragged through the mud. Her fear was the fear of being erased, replaced, or condemned before her life as queen had even begun. Some queens wrote later of trembling so violently they could not undress themselves. Others confessed that they prayed their husbands would be gentle, sober, or simply patient. But history offers enough chilling accounts to show that many kings saw the wedding night not as a moment to reassure a frightened bride, but as an opportunity to assert control or dominance. A queen who feared her wedding night was not weak, she was realistic, and so the wedding night became a silent crucible, shaping destinies in shadows. It was the night that defined queenship more than any coronation could, yet the dread they felt did not end when the candles burned low. What happened during those hours would echo into the days and years that followed, setting the stage for what every queen feared next, the relentless scrutiny of her purity, her fertility, and her worth. In the medieval world, a queen's virginity was not a private matter, nor a symbolic ideal. It was political currency, perhaps the most valuable asset she brought into a marriage. It could legitimize alliances, calm rival factions, and reassure kingdoms that the heirs born from her body would carry the correct blood. But this reverence came with a cruel cost. Her purity was not assumed, it had to be proven. And the pressure to produce this proof transformed the wedding night into a moment of profound terror. From the moment a princess was betrothed, the whispers began. Courtiers speculated about her innocence, clerics preached its necessity, and diplomats negotiated with her body as if it were a treaty. Virginity was presented as virtue, but in truth it was surveillance, a tool by which kings and kingdoms controlled the women they elevated. The queen-to-be lived under constant watch. Every interaction, every rumour, every hint of impropriety could be used against her. A single accusation, even fabricated, could jeopardize her future marriage, void the alliance, or brand her as unfit to rule. So on her wedding night, the anxiety sharpened into fear. The consummation was treated like a legal act, a binding stamp on a contract. And to confirm it, courts relied on practices that today feel invasive and humiliating. In some regions, noblewomen or midwives were tasked with inspecting the bride before the ceremony, examining her body not for health, but for proof of an intact hymen. This inspection was rarely accurate. Hymens vary widely, and medieval medicine understood little of anatomy. Yet the results of these examinations could decide her fate. Even after consummation, the scrutiny continued. The sheets themselves became evidence, carried out the next morning and displayed before select members of the court. Blood was taken as confirmation of purity, though countless women then and now do not bleed during intercourse. But medieval society did not leave room for biological nuance. If the sheets did not show what the court expected, suspicions spread like fire. The queen might be accused of hiding a previous lover, of being violated before marriage, or even of conspiring with a political rival. Her word held little power against the weight of expectation. The consequences could be devastating. Some queens faced annulment, their marriages dissolved on grounds of supposed impurity. Others endured public shame or were forced into confessions to preserve fragile alliances, and still others were quietly replaced, traded like pieces on a diplomatic chessboard. The queen understood that her future did not depend on her intelligence, her grace, or her diplomatic skill. It depended on whether her wedding night produced the right outcome. Virginity was treated as a measure of honor, but it served a deeper purpose. It safeguarded the legitimacy of heirs. The purity of the queen ensured that any child born to her could inherit without question. And so kingdoms clung to the concept, enforcing it with rituals, examinations, and threats that robbed queens of their privacy and their humanity. For these women, the fear of failing this unspoken test could overshadow even the dread of consummation itself. They entered marriage knowing that their bodies would be dissected, judged, and interpreted by others. They knew one wrong sign could unravel everything, but the pressure did not stop with proving purity. Because after the wedding night's inspection came another expectation, more relentless, more public, and far more dangerous: the demand for an heir and the race against time that followed. If the wedding night itself was terrifying, the ceremony that led to it was often worse. Medieval queens did not simply walk into their chambers and close the door. They were escorted there in a ritual known across Europe as the public bedding, a tradition that transformed the most intimate moment of their lives into a spectacle overseen by nobles, clergy, and sometimes entire courts. It was a performance, a declaration, and a reminder that the queen's body belonged not to herself, but to the kingdom she had just married into. The ritual began with processions. Courtiers gathered in the hall, laughing, drinking, and waiting for the moment the couple would be brought forward. The queen, dressed in elaborate ceremonial garments, was led through the crowd while people commented openly on her beauty, her youth, and the duties she would soon face. She smiled because she had to, even as her heart pounded beneath the layers of silk and brocade. Her husband walked beside her, often indifferent, sometimes eager, occasionally drunk, an unpredictable companion on a night that held enormous consequences. When they reached the bedchamber, the ritual became even more invasive. Clergy entered first, sprinkling holy water over the bed and reciting prayers meant to sanctify the act about to occur. To the queen, these blessings often felt like a grim reminder that every step of the process was observed, documented, and judged. Then came the nobles. High-ranking men and women crowded inside, offering bawdy jokes, ritual blessings, or condescending advice. Some guided the couple toward the bed, lifting covers, straightening pillows, or adjusting garments as if preparing them for a public ceremony rather than a private union. And in many ways, that is exactly what it was. The ritual served a purpose. It ensured witnesses could confirm that the couple entered the bed together with the intention of consummation. In some courts, the attendants would remain until the couple lay down side by side, fully visible. Only then would the curtains be drawn, thin barriers between the royal couple and the rustling presence of those waiting just outside the chamber door. For the queen, the humiliation was profound. She was expected to undress while noblewomen hovered nearby, removing her outer clothes and offering coded encouragement. The laughter in the hall, the murmured commentary, the rustle of silks. These sounds followed her as she climbed into the bed. Even after the attendants withdrew, she knew they lingered, listening for movement, waiting for signs of completion. Privacy was an illusion, one she could not afford to question. In some regions, the intrusion escalated further. Witnesses might re-enter the room after the act, inspecting the sheets or confirming details with the king. Though extreme, such practices were not rare. They reflected the broader truth: a queen's wedding night was never truly hers. It was a ritual of surveillance, a public affirmation that she had fulfilled her duty. For kings, the bedding ceremony was a mild inconvenience, an odd tradition to endure on the path to pleasure or power. For queens, it was an ordeal, an introduction to a life of constant scrutiny, where even the boundaries of the bed offered no protection. The ritual made one thing painfully clear: her body was part of the monarchy's machinery, governed by custom, expectation, and the relentless eyes of the court. Yet the public bedding was only the beginning. Once the doors finally closed and the witnesses withdrew, another fear took its place, a deeper, more unpredictable danger that came from the man she had just been left alone with. Behind the closed doors of royal chambers, far from the polite rituals and formal prayers, many queens discovered a truth far darker than they had ever been warned about. Some kings approached the wedding night with restraint, hoping to reassure a frightened young bride. But others entered that room not as partners, but as tyrants. For these queens, the fear of the court outside was nothing compared to the terror standing before them. Power had shaped their husbands, warping their desires, inflating their tempers, and turning the wedding bed into a stage for dominance rather than union. History offers names whispered with dread. Kings known for cruelty, for violent appetites, for tempers that flared into savagery behind closed doors. Queens who trembled not because of the expectations placed upon them, but because the man they were forced to marry had earned a reputation for brutality. There were kings who arrived drunk, their emotions sharpened by a wine, kings who viewed their brides as trophies to be conquered, kings who believed that fear made a queen obedient, and with no one to intervene, no one to protect them, these women faced the night alone. Many of these queens were teenagers, some barely old enough to understand the political machinery that had carried them to the throne. Their husbands, however, were often seasoned adults, war-hardened, politically scarred, accustomed to absolute obedience. In their minds, the wedding night was a test of ownership. They wanted proof of dominance, not tenderness. Their violence was not always physical. Sometimes it was humiliation, degradation, or the cold refusal to acknowledge the queen as anything more than a vessel for heirs. There are accounts of queens who cried through the night, praying the ordeal would end quickly. Others tried to reason with their husbands, only to be met with rage or scorn. The imbalance of power was absolute. A queen who resisted could be labelled disobedient, frigid, or unfit. A king's word always outweighed hers, and the consequences of displeasing him could be catastrophic, not just that night, but for the rest of her reign. Her survival depended on his moods, his choices, his whims. Some kings turned their cruelty into spectacle. They boasted to courtiers about their success, shared intimate details with noblemen, or mocked their brides for fear, inexperience, or silence. A queen's pain became the king's entertainment, her humiliation his victory. The court, hungry for gossip, often fueled his behaviour. And because the bedding ceremony had made the wedding night a public matter, queens found that even their suffering became subject to discussion, debate, or rumour. But the deepest terror came afterward, when queens realised that this night was not an exception, it was a precedent. A king who treated his bride with cruelty on the wedding night seldom grew kinder with time. His behaviour would shape her daily existence, overshadow her pregnancies, influence her safety, and determine whether she lived in comfort or in constant fear. The wedding night was only the introduction to a marriage marked by dominance and dread. Yet even this violence had another layer. For the queen, the worst consequence was not simply enduring the king's cruelty, it was failing to produce the heir he demanded. Because no matter how monstrous the king became, no matter how traumatic the nights that followed, the court watched her body for one sign, a pregnancy that could secure the dynasty. And so, once the ordeal of the wedding night ended, another weight descended upon her, a weight even heavier, more relentless, and far more dangerous. For medieval queens, the morning after the wedding night did not bring relief. It brought a new and suffocating pressure, one that followed them long after the chamber doors opened and the court's whispers faded. Because from that moment on, every eye in the kingdom turned toward one question: when will she produce an heir? A queen's worth, her safety, and her future depended on her ability to conceive quickly and carry a healthy child, preferably a son. Love had no place in this expectation. Marriage was a contract of bloodlines, and her body was the guarantee. The scrutiny was immediate. Courtiers studied her mood, her appetite, her skin, searching for the earliest signs of pregnancy. Clergy blessed her womb in ceremonies that felt more like pressure than comfort. Even her household tracked her cycle, reporting changes, real or imagined, to those in power. A queen could not hide her body, not even from those who served her. If she showed no signs of pregnancy within months, murmurs began. Was the marriage consummated properly? Was she barren? Was she cursed by God? The whispers grew sharper with each passing season. Miscarriages, so common and so rarely understood in medieval medicine, were tragedies the queen was forced to endure in public. Instead of sympathy, she received suspicion. Some believed a miscarriage meant she had failed morally or spiritually. Others blamed witchcraft, and many blamed the queen herself. Each loss chipped away at her standing, her security, and her husband's patience. Some kings responded with coldness, others with rage. A queen's grief was often overshadowed by political fear. The danger only intensified when no heir appeared. A queen who failed to conceive could be set aside, annulled, or replaced. Alliances negotiated for years could unravel in a moment. Families lost influence, kingdoms lost stability, and in the centre of it all stood a woman blamed for a fate she could not control. Her very survival depended on producing a child, something biology might not allow, no matter how desperately she tried. And when queens did conceive, the terra Samoa did not end. It multiplied. Pregnancy was perilous. Childbirth could kill. Every contraction, every fever, every complication threatened not only her life but the entire future of the realm. Queens entered labour chambers knowing that many before them had not left alive. Those who survived were praised. Those who died were mourned quickly and replaced even faster. The dynasty had to continue. The obsession with heirs shaped every part of a queen's existence. Her diet, her sleep, her activities were monitored. She was discouraged from travel, from exercise, from stress. Yet ironically, nothing produced more stress than the pressure to deliver a son. Her body became a political arena, her womb a national concern. Even her relationship with the king shifted. A loving or indifferent husband could become impatient, distant, or cruel. Others took mistresses openly, claiming the queen's supposed failure as justification. Some queens endured years of this silent battle. Others triumphed, producing heirs that secured their place. But even for those who succeeded, the memory of the pressure, the fear of replacement, and the constant surveillance never faded. Because the truth was clear, a queen's power, dignity, and safety did not come from her crown. They came from the children she bore, and from the court's belief that she could continue to bear them. And yet, even after centuries, the echoes of this pressure did not vanish. It transformed, adapted, and found new ways to persist, reappearing in modern monarchies where the scrutiny of royal women remains relentless, though far more carefully hidden. Centuries have passed since medieval queens trembled on their wedding nights, yet the shadows of their suffering still linger in the modern world. Thrones have changed, crowns have evolved, and monarchies have softened their laws, but the scrutiny placed upon royal women has not disappeared. It has only shifted shape. Today, the rituals are less brutal, the traditions less explicit, but the pressure remains etched into the foundations of royal life. The world no longer demands blood-stained sheets or public bedding ceremonies, but it demands something equally invasive: transparency, perfection, and the illusion of a flawless royal family. Modern royal brides still marry under the weight of expectation, their weddings broadcast to millions, their futures dissected by tabloids and global audiences. Every gesture, every expression, every hint of tension becomes a headline, and once the celebration fades, the next wave of fascination begins, echoing the same medieval obsession: when will she produce an heir? The language has gentled, but the sentiment persists. Speculation about pregnancies, fertility, and marital intimacy fills gossip columns in ways strikingly similar to the whispered court rumours of the past. Even today, royal women face relentless pressure to present pure, controlled public images. Their bodies become subjects of analysis: how they dress, how they gesture, how quickly they return to public duties after childbirth. Though no modern queen is forced into a public bedding ceremony, the scrutiny remains just as public, magnified through cameras, commentary, and digital media. The world watches with the same hunger for detail, the same fixation on legacy, the same fascination with the intersection of power and intimacy. And modern queens, duchesses, and princesses still navigate the quiet burden of expectations. They must balance tradition with independence, duty with identity, all while knowing that their mistakes, real or imagined, carry consequences far beyond personal embarrassment. A single rumour, a misinterpreted expression, or a delayed pregnancy can fuel speculation that feels eerily medieval. The tools have changed, but the judgment has not. In many ways, history repeats itself not through rituals but through psychology. Medieval queens lived under the constant awareness that their value was tied to their performance in roles they did not choose. Today, royal women find themselves in similar positions, expected to uphold centuries of tradition, maintain perfect public images, and navigate pressures that ordinary people can scarcely imagine. They may not face annulment or political exile, but they face emotional strain, media storms, and the crushing weight of expectations inherited from centuries of monarchy. Understanding the fear medieval queens carried into their wedding nights helps us see modern royalty with clarity. Behind the tiaras, ceremonies, and polished appearances lie human beings navigating a world that still demands more from them than it ever should. Their ancestors were judged by sheets and ceremonies. They are judged by headlines and photographs. And though the brutality is hidden beneath layers of modern decorum, the legacy of control and scrutiny remains deeply embedded in royal life. The story of why medieval queens feared their wedding nights is not merely a tale of the distant past. It is a reminder of how power shapes people, how institutions mold expectations, and how women throughout history have borne the heaviest burdens of monarchy. And as long as society remains fascinated with royalty, the echoes of those ancient fears will continue to resonate, quietly, hauntingly across the centuries.